Good evening and welcome to Information Please, your Peoria Public Library on the air, bringing you information about your library and your community. And this evening is the second part of my stories with Norm Kelly, and he says he can talk about this for 8 hours. So we're going to keep it to a half hour. But here's Norm, and we're going to talk about Prohibition in Peoria. Hi, Norm.
Hi. Of course, I drink beer during that 8-hour period.
Do you? Do you?
I do. I have drink 2 every day, but I used to earn it by running and a lot. But I don't run anymore, so I still drink it. But important, it was so important.
Well, it's a good thing that you weren't around during Prohibition, and maybe that's why you're so fascinated by it, the sheer horror of no beer.
The truth is that there was more alcohol in Peoria, Illinois during Prohibition than any other time in its entire history, but not so much beer, because the beer was very difficult.
Well, I found this headline from 1917, Whiskey Makers See Final Doom in U.S. Food Law.
I can tell you about that law.
Yeah, the distillers of Peoria expect to be forced out of business entirely by the law prohibiting the use of food products in the manufacture of intoxicating liquors for beverage purposes after September 8th.
That's exactly the law.
And I don't think people aren't aware of how the slow stranglehold of Prohibition worked. So
I can start.
Law?
Well, first of all, we have to understand every living human being that wants to even think about it, if they don't look up Wayne B. Wheeler, if they don't look up Wayne Bidwell Wheeler, then they're not going to know anything about it. If you think it was just the cute little ladies walking around with
hatchets.
signs, and they came to Peoria, and of course she didn't get here until 1901, had no effect at all, but never mind her. We know what we're all talking about, Carrie Nation.
Yeah.
But in Peoria, Illinois, we had a Red Nose Gang, and we had the Red Ribbon Gang. That's what they call them. And the little ladies they're all from churches, and they joined together, and they would walk around our taverns. But it had nothing to do with Prohibition. It was Wayne B. Wheeler. You have to understand who he was. And he was the most powerful human being in America's history. And I would just say this to your audience, none of you even know who he was. No. And yet, how can Norm sit there and say he was the most powerful? Well, because he was. Because the whole movement, the whole AntiSaloon League was a political, religious movement guided strictly by Wayne Wheeler and, of course, his people, and how he did it. All of the states, he enlisted the help, an army of deacons, reverends, parsons, all of the church. And the church...
Was this a specific church or just churches in general?
There were about 9 of them, and I won't get into there. But there were about 9 of them, but they covered thousands and thousands of people. And the idea of it was to recruit. That's it, folks. To recruit the political people. And they think of it. They start by asking only one question. Tricia, you want to run for the, you want to run for Senate from Illinois? Is that what you want to do?
Sure.
Well, now state. And you say, I certainly do. And they say, well, do you have any money? No. What is your standing? What is your feeling about the movement of Prohibition? And you'd say, I am against alcohol. That's all, just shut up. They'll never ask you another question. Multiply that by thousands. Add to that every department in state legislature. Ready? That's how they did it. Okay, so now it took him 6 years. Remember Wayne B. Wheeler in Peoria, they're walking around and they're just doing all kinds of things. And a few reverends are coming in and they're talking about booze. And the staggering thing, by 1920, when Prohibition actually came, 20 states were already dry. 20 states were already dry. The Volstead Act, the whole 18th Amendment, the whole 18th Amendment, which is Prohibition, it's all done. By 1917, there was exactly what you just said, and they shut down our breweries and distillers because the law said you cannot use foodstuffs. to make alcohol. Well, you can imagine what happened to the farmers in Peoria. All around, for 69 years, they brought everything in. The biggest distillery, breweries, all going on in Peoria, Illinois. And of course, come that time, bang, on the 9th of September, distilleries and breweries were shut down. 1917, they all did it. A conservation act to feed our doughboys in Europe was the biggest, phoniest, fake thing, and every farmer in the United States knew it. They battled it, but you can't take on Wayne B. Wheeler. You could not. There is no way. And then finally, they did the exact same thing then when it came to federal government. He bought governors. He bought senators, representatives. It's all there, folks. It's all in the congressional record. And that's where I wrote, and no wonder I could talk about it for all those hours, and because it was magnificently done. A tiny handful of people shoved Prohibition down the throats
of the rest
of
of the country.
whole country. And what happened? Canada, blink, woke up.
Yeah.
They were dry, and they looked down at all those states and started opening up breweries, distilleries, you name it, they did it. Every ounce of booze that Al Capone and all those people you guys talk about, and all the gangsters, all they did was get the booze from Canada, and of course a little bit of booze they made, If you had a thimble and filled it full of whiskey and then walked down to the Pacific Ocean, that's the amount of booze made in the United States during Prohibition. Throw that in there. It was all coming down from Canada by the thousands.
And I have heard a story about the old Julian Hotel, that the woman who owned the Federal Warehouse, what's now the Federal Warehouse across the street, and all during Prohibition, that building was just chock full of Canadian whiskey.
Yeah.
That's what that building was.
And how'd she get it?
How'd she get it? Down the river, I'm
she
sure.
bought it.
Yep, she bought it.
Same way with Al Capone's people, they waited till Harry bought it, and then they attack Harry. You got the point? Well, Harry's gang attacked them. The whole battle going up there. And in Peoria was just, all the phony stuff about Bernie Shelton, who wasn't even here. I mean, guys, the myths about it. But the point I'm getting at, then we opened up all of our taverns. Think of that. Mayor Woodruff opened up our taverns and sold soft drink license. And of course, the men that opened their taverns up, they turned them into confectionaries, soft drink parlors, get it? And then by 9 o'clock at night, look out.
Look out what's coming out.
That's where the flapper and the jazz and the wonderful, incredible excitement of then was all down here from booze that poured in here. And don't forget, we had our own distilleries. They were doing medicinal.
And I know you're not interested in this, but I am. I found this other article, and you told me, copper is boring. But I think people want to really understand what happened here. And so there's this great article from 1917. This week sees Peoria give up title of the chief whiskey distilling center of the world.
We were.
Government halts use of grain for liquors. And so Saturday night, September 8th at 11 o'clock, Peoria will give up the place she's occupied for half a century as the chief whiskey distilling center of the world.
Longer.
4 of the 5 distilleries, which have been furnishing 1/3 of the nation's supply of whiskey, will stop mashing corn for that purpose during the coming week. The plants will close down or reopen to do something else.
Sure. Well, we hear that. There's the key.
But it says Atlas Distilling is the only plant not to be affected because they'd already been making alcohol.
They have a contract.
For the war.
They have a contract for
a
the government.
contract to make alcohol, like medicinal alcohol.
That's right.
And then they talk about they're ready if they're needed. If they need this for first aid in the war.
That's funny.
But they talk about the farmers will suffer. Farmers of Central Illinois will suffer because of their soft corn market. They've provided the only market for soft corn. Uncle Sam will hardly miss the internal revenue tax, which was wiped out when the distilleries ceased manufacturing beverage liquors. The loss will be 30 million per annum. And then they talk about that one of the groups that's most affected is the people who make the barrels, the coopers. And I didn't use that word coopers because I'm not sure people know what a cooper is anymore.
That's right.
So the coopers are all going out of business. They have no need to make barrels anymore. And on top of that, the copper industry is going to be hurt because the copper industry provides all those wonderful little tubes.
Well, just think about it, though,
distillery
Tricia.
process.
It's the whole everything.
Everything.
And who do we have to thank? Well,
that guy.
Exactly. Why? Why did he do it?
Well, he must have had a strong belief, or I don't know. Why did he do it?
Well, first of all, he certainly had a strong belief, didn't he? And so did all the rest of them. But so did a lot of other religious people who certainly did not believe that we need to destroy America, which is what they attempt to do, and start the biggest reign of terror, murder, mayhem, corruption known to mankind. And after 5 years, stand right here in the city, Peoria, Illinois, these religious fools, and they were, tell us how wonderful it was and how everything is so perfect.
There are articles, there are editorials written from that time that say, oh, well, we make even more money now and we're more prosperous and it's a better city. And there's a list here of what distilleries went to doing. The Corning Distillery began making cornmeal.
Sure.
Woolner made commercial alcohol. Atlas made commercial alcohol.
Hold it. Denatured, you don't see the word?
No.
Denatured alcohol has 16 things in it that would kill us.
Right.
That is the phony thing you're reading there. It's ridiculous. Denatured
They went
alcohol.
to making corn syrup then.
Sure they did. They did, and that's why we prospered.
And the Schulfelt Distillery was making the finest apple butter in the country, jellies, maraschino cherries, and they're going to build an 8-story daylight plant to make apple butter and jelly.
So the whole history, if you read my stuff, you'll find out that we prospered. 28,488 people moved into the city of Peoria during 1920 to 1930. Think of that. This is the largest increase. Why'd they come here? Because we were broke? It's because we prospered. We prospered on our own. And we fought and we battled those. And then we had 166 soft drink parlors were selling more booze then than they ever were during the time when they were legally open for alcohol. Right. And how did we do that? Because we hated the United States government. We hated Prohibition. We hated all the connections with it. This town fought it tooth and nail and could not win. Why? Tell me.
That guy.
That guy, Wayne B. Wheeler. Because why? Because all you have to do is look at the congressional record. Now remember, they weren't Democrats. They weren't Republicans. Nobody can point the finger at Democrats or Republicans or anybody else. Point your finger at the dries or the wets. And who were the dries? These were the people who were Americans, who believed, look, if I want to drink, I have a right to drink. The wets said, no, you don't. You don't have any right to drink anything, and they certainly have no alcohol, and we have the right to shut down anything that even looks like a tavern. We do. And who was behind it? Wayne B. Wheeler. And the Volstead Act was just a Minnesota puppet. He was a senator, no, he wasn't even a senator. He was a representative from Minnesota. And of course, don't forget, Wayne B. Wheeler didn't run any offices. He picked you, and he picked him, and he picked her. And the idea was, here, run with this. He needed the income tax rule to come into effect because he knew the government was going to lose these millions of dollars. And who do you think? Well, he bought the senators. And when he wanted the income tax law, he got it. And then you know what he got? He got the 18th Amendment. And when did we finally get rid of this? Finally, in April of 1933, we began, finally, the Volstead Act was nicked, and we started making a little bit of booze, and in December 1933, FDR came in 32, ended it all. And so if you really want to know about it, well, I think the thing to do is just Google me.
Yeah.
I think so, because if you really want to know, It's there.
Well, there's a new story we're putting up called Beer Hail to the King.
Exactly.
That talks about the, crowds surrounding the beer trucks and people buying cases of beer right off of the first beer truck to come into town.
Of course, you know what? If you were a dry person and a very religious person, the alcohol was evil.
Yeah.
Now, if you believe that, how can we do anything about it?
How did they eventually defeat the most powerful man in America and get their way?
He died. He died.
When did he die?
He died before Prohibition ended, and then it weakened, and then of course what happened? The money stopped flowing to these phony representatives. Got it? If suddenly I'm going to run for office again and I've got a dry I'm running against, I don't have any money. Suddenly, though, when the money stopped going to the dry candidate, and Americans who are in my district started saying, wait a minute, we're going to send somebody there to change all this. Don't you get it? You're catching on. And then suddenly, the guy who was the wet, that's all they called them, wets and dry, the wets started attacking. He wouldn't dare do that if he was dry. Yeah. Don't you get it? Wheeler would stop the money instantaneously, and so slowly we begin to get. Now remember, you can talk Democrat and Republican if you want to, but they did not. Yeah. They talked dry, wet, and then so finally, when more and more of the wets were being sent, and don't forget, Tricia, this is just talking about alcohol. We voted about all kinds of other things. He didn't care. He didn't care if you voted this way, that way, or the other. He did not care.
The only thing he cared about was the alcohol.
Two things. One, Prohibition. Of course, that's what he wanted. He wanted to prohibit. Got the word? And then secondly, he wanted to make sure he sent the right people there to vote for the income tax. Abraham Lincoln had an income tax too. And where did he looked at Peoria. We paid him $35 million a year for Abe's army. But once they taxed us up to $2, things got tough. Well, then you can just look and see when was the first income tax. See. Right during the war, when let's face it, the breweries and distillers are shutting down. The taxes were really hurting the small. And who flew through it all? Peoria, Illinois.
Yeah.
One of the greatest little towns in the whole world.
Here's a great picture. Clark's Pure Rye, the pure of all, back after 16 years.
Well, isn't that horrible when you think about drinking pure rye? You don't think I lean their way totally.
Nonetheless, how often do you see a banner strung across Main Street in Peoria these days?
You bet. Just because a person like me talks about dries, I'm talking about the right as an American, the constitutional right. So what did they do? Well, they changed it. They brought in the 18th Amendment. Gun rights today. We already have the Second Amendment. What they got to do is appeal it. They don't talk about that. They just want to stop you from having your rights. And when those people did it throughout the whole thing, you have to fight them back. But you can't if you don't own D.C.
You're right.
Sad, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's another great, and of course I love anything advertising. I would love to have a little car and a trailer with big speaker horns on it and talk about the library. Wouldn't that be fun?
Well, yeah.
I think go down the street and tell people to
Isn't that
library card.
Cute? What do you think?
This is the kind of thing you can get, of course, at the library. We have these in our picture files, and so. But this is also celebrating the Clark's Rye whiskey is back.
Wow.
This is a line drawing. This is probably a woodcut from before photographs were used in the paper. But this is one of the early distilleries. That place is huge.
Look
and
at
you've got all the
people.
Horse-drawn carts out front.
Look at the people. And at
that time, of course, my husband's family was here, and they were harness makers and saddle makers. And, of course, they were producing things for, this kind of industry.
Absolutely.
Because you had to have all those horses. It would have been like the people who work on trucks now.
And look at the railroads when they came in town. It was amazing. Yes. Then we got dry ice and began to ship our product.
That's another thing that was mentioned. When you go through our file of articles we have on Prohibition, it talks about the whiskey railroad and that there was one whiskey railroad that went from Peoria to I guess it says Erie, and I guess I don't know if they mean the city or the lake.
No, it was the lake and the city, of course.
And they talk about how it was the only one in the country, the whiskey run, and how, well, they were just going to have to find something else to haul on that.
It was tremendous history in Peoria as to jobs, and that was an amazing, astounding thing that it created. And just because you speak on behalf of the Wets, you know, people think, oh, well, he just wants everybody to get drunk. Hey, it's your right or it isn't. And then it was illegal. United States, most of America, people who never drank in their lives, said, no jerk from D.C. is going to tell me. Of course, no one knew Wayne B. Wheeler.
Yeah.
They didn't know any. They don't understand. This is like a big major
Where did he
secret.
live?
In Ohio. And he graduated from university there. When he was 11 years old, he was in a barn with his sisters, and one of the drunken railroaders came there and asked for water and attacked his sister. And he came to his aid, and the man stuck him with a pitchfork. Oh. And of course, he's hated them ever since. That was just the beginning. He was the most brilliant, most unbelievable person. As far as the brain power and know how to deal and wheel and deal, scrawny little guy with glasses, and there's occasional picture of him in the Senate. He, just sitting back there, and he's looking at Tricia, and he's waiting for Tricia to get up and say exactly what he told her to say. He wrote the Volstead Act. He wrote the 18th Amendment. He wrote all of the laws concerning it. Wayne Bidwell. We called him Bird Brain, but he was not. He was a brilliant person.
Do you think the average person in Peoria knew who he was?
No, absolutely no. Now, only people who knew him and never met him were the ones running for the offices from dog catcher to governor. He influenced for 12 years, the absolute most powerful living human being.
What does his tombstone say? We'll have to find that out.
What would it say? You know?
I don't know. We can find that on Find a Grave at the library.
I can guarantee it because I've already seen it, but I don't remember.
Don't remember what it says.
And he was a very decent, nice person. He was just obsessed with ending and making, and here's his quote, heaven on earth. There will be no jails. There will be no problem. There will be no wife beatings. There will be nothing but heaven on earth. Now you sell that to a bunch of fanatics and then smart enough to realize votes. Never mind all the Bible beating and all that. Never mind that. Votes. Well, the only thing we need is votes. And he was brilliant
at getting the vote.
He knew how to pressure. He was incredible. Then he moved to D.C. Of course.
Where he could be in the heart of the action.
How would you like to own the whole country? How would you like to own the whole country? Which he did. And when I say him, of course he had his lieutenants. And don't forget, the reverends, the deacons, the parsons, whatever they call them, they're from the pulpit. And they were recruiting from the church. In other words, Henry Schweigenheimer wants to run for a state senator. And this deacon's job, because the money was coming, you understand, his job was to meet Harry and ask him, Harry, that one question. And suddenly, that Saturday, Reverend somebody who really, people knew, Billy Sunday, you name it, they would come into your little town and say, Harry is the best possible man to send to D.C. And they all said, wonderful. And they voted. And I'm telling you, boy, it worked like clockwork. There was opposition there, but
not enough.
Ask yourself what's going on in the Senate today.
Yes.
How it's one-sided. How do we get Obamacare? Ask yourself those questions if you want to. I don't care if you do or you don't. But that's
well, it is an interesting lesson if people are frustrated with Washington now, to look back at those kinds of things. And that's what they say, nothing new under the sun. And when you forget your history is when you get into trouble. You're wise people if you know the
Know the
history.
Constitution,
Know what
demand that
happened.
they serve it. That's all you're asking them to
Yeah.
do.
And of
Well,
course,
you know,
all that information is at the library. You can go
and it's
back
in my articles,
look
and
at-
it's on
It is
your
much more
website.
easily digestible in your articles on our website than it is maybe to read the.
And if you want to argue with me, all you have to do is email me.
And you'll argue via email.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or I'll demand that you have some kind of proof.
And here's another wonderful picture. This is Hiram Walker, 750,000th barrel filled since Prohibition ended. These are some pretty happy guys, but it says July 31st, 1936.
Think about
on
that's
the
only
side of that
3 years. You mean they made that much, or are they adding it before? They must have. But it was
They
largest.
said they had, when they closed on September 8th, everybody had a 2-year supply of alcoholic beverages. How long were they able to sell that legally? If on September 8th, when the Food Act went in, and they had 2 years supply.
That's a beautiful question, because the truth is, it's illegal to manufacture alcohol. You can sell it, no you wouldn't or couldn't, but you can buy it, and you can drink it, and you can possess X amount, and I won't go into all that.
Yeah.
So there was enough loopholes in the 18th Amendment to drive 87 semis through. The Volstead Act came to enforce it, and it was, you know what I could do? I could come on this show and read you the Volstead Act, and we would laugh and laugh and laugh.
At the
It
act.
was that funny. It was so stupid, so pathetic. They thought everyone wants it, and they only hired a total of 1,500 max. This is total of the so-called dry agents to enforce it, covering thousands and thousands and thousands. It was a
And
joke.
thereby providing plenty of material for not only Norm Kelly, but all the script writers and
You're
book
right.
writers out there. Norm, we're going to have to quit, and you could
Too
talk for
bad.
8 hours.
I could
know.
tell you, yeah.
So thank you
That's
so
right.
much
Yeah,
for
it's
coming
fun.
and talking, and I
fun.
hope people will read this stuff for themselves.
I'd hope so.
It's all at the library. You'll find it on the website, and we'll see you next week on Information Please.